The night always began with silence. It wasn't the peaceful kind, this one carried weight, like the air before a storm. Ethan Rivers sat by the window of his apartment, tracing a finger along the glass fogged by his breath. Down below, the city pulsed with life, cars, voices, laughter, but none of it reached him. Behind him, Michael Hale sat on the couch, eyes fixed on the bluish glow of his laptop. They had been together 4 years. They had stopped really being together at least one ago. Ethan glanced over his shoulder. Michael's face was calm, unreadable, the same expression he wore when handling clients or typing out business reports. There had been a time when that face lit up the room, when Ethan had memorized every freckle along his jaw, when love was as natural as breathing. Now, they barely spoke. Meals were quiet, their bed colder than it looked. Michael would say, "I'm just tired," and Ethan would nod, pretending not to feel the distance widening like a silent fault line that he tried once to talk about it. It was after midnight, and they were sitting at opposite ends of the couch. He had said softly, "Michael, I can't keep doing this. I feel like I'm disappearing next to you." Michael had looked up, confused, almost annoyed. "What do you mean?" he'd asked, already half distracted. Ethan had waited, hoping he'd see the fear in his eyes, but Michael's phone vibrated, and that was the end of the conversation. He had warned him then. But Michael didn't hear anything. Days blurred into each other after that. Ethan went to work at the design studio, came home, made dinner, and filled the silences with music he didn't like just to have something human in the room. Sometimes, he caught himself rehearsing conversations they'd never have, telling Michael he was lonely, that love shouldn't feel like exile. But when the moment came, the words always died in his throat. One Friday evening, Michael called to say he'd be late again. Another meeting. Ethan didn't even ask with whom. Instead, he took a walk through the city to avoid the echo of his own apartment. The air smelled like rain and exhaust, the streets shimmering with reflected neon. He wandered into an art gallery, one of those minimalist spaces filled with things that looked like emotion disguised as shape. He didn't know why he stopped there, only that something inside him needed color. That was where he met Julian Cross. Julian was standing near a painting, something abstract and aching, all blues and fractured whites. He was tall, casually elegant, his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He caught Ethan studying the canvas and said, "It looks like loneliness, doesn't it?" His voice was low, unhurried. Ethan blinked, startled, and smiled politely. "Maybe. Or maybe it's the feeling of trying not to be lonely." Julian's eyes lingered on him longer than polite conversation allowed. "You sound like someone who understands that difference." They talked, first about the painting, then about art, then about everything else. It was effortless, like exhaling after holding one's breath too long. Julian laughed easily, listened completely. There was no weight between them, no expectation. Just connection. Ethan realized he hadn't laughed like that in months. When Julian asked if he was there alone, Ethan hesitated before saying yes. It wasn't a lie, not in the way it mattered. Before leaving, Julian handed him a small card. "I curate at the Leon Street Gallery. We're doing a private showing next week. You should come, if you like." Ethan took the card, their fingers brushing briefly. It was a small touch, but it lingered longer than it should have. Back home, Michael was asleep, the lamp still on. Ethan placed the card on the nightstand and stared at it for a long time. He told himself it was nothing. Just an invitation. Just art. But in the morning, when he saw Michael rushing through his routine, tie, coffee, car keys, silence, he knew that nothing had already become something dangerous. In the days that followed, Ethan tried to push the thought away. But Julian's voice replayed in his mind, calm and warm. He found himself drafting messages, deleting them, then finally sending one, "Hi. About that private showing, still happening?" The reply came within minutes, "Absolutely. Would be good to see you again, Ethan." That evening, Ethan stood in front of his closet for half an hour, unsure what to wear. He felt ridiculous, like a teenager sneaking out. But he went. The gallery was smaller than before, dimly lit, almost intimate. Julian was waiting near the entrance, smiling in a way that reached his eyes. They walked together through the quiet space, talking about the pieces, though neither really paid attention to them. Ethan found himself confessing small truths, how he once wanted to be an artist, how love sometimes felt like endurance, how silence could suffocate more than shouting ever could. Julian didn't interrupt. He simply listened, every glance steady, every pause safe. When they stopped near a painting that looked like a storm trapped behind glass, Ethan whispered, "It's strange. I used to think being with someone meant you'd never feel alone again." Julian looked at him. "Sometimes, the loneliest place is right next to the person you love." Ethan turned away, pretending to study the painting. His heartbeat was unsteady. He wanted to say something, "Thank you, stop, help," but no words came. Julian didn't move closer, didn't touch him. Yet something had already shifted between them. Later that night, Ethan returned home to find Michael asleep on the couch again, television humming faintly. He stood there, watching him. There was no anger, only a hollow kind of ache. He realized he didn't even want to wake him. Instead, he went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stared at his reflection in the window that he tried to recall the last time he'd felt truly seen, truly heard. Julian's face flickered in his memory, not for what had happened, but for what hadn't. The attention, the warmth, the sense of being noticed. Ethan pressed his hand against the cool glass and whispered to no one, "I can't take this much longer." In the silence, the city lights blurred into smudges of color. The phone on the table buzzed once. A message. "Julian, I'm glad you came tonight." Ethan didn't reply, not immediately. He turned off the lights, leaving the apartment dark except for the faint glow from the street outside. For the first time in a long while, he felt the pull of something new, something he both feared and needed. That he knew, deep down, that he was already standing at the edge of a choice that would change everything. And as he lay beside Michael that night, staring into the dark, Ethan's last thought before sleep was not of guilt but of a voice that had finally heard him. The rain had been falling since afternoon, a steady, unbroken rhythm that seemed to echo the noise in Ethan's head. By the time he reached the gallery that evening, the streets shimmered under the weight of water and distant neon. Julian stood waiting just inside, his shirt damp at the collar, hair curling slightly from the humidity. He smiled as Ethan entered, and that smile, gentle, certain, unraveled every hesitation Ethan had carried with him. They didn't speak at first. Julian simply handed him a towel, a small gesture that felt oddly intimate. The space was quiet except for the rain against the glass walls. Tonight, the exhibition was closed. Julian had told him he wanted to show one last collection before it moved to another city. Ethan had almost declined. Almost. But something about the idea of being seen again, of being somewhere that wasn't full of silence, had drawn him here like gravity. That he followed Julian between canvases that glimmered faintly under low lights. Each piece looked like a confession painted into shape, fractures, light, and shadow dancing across the walls. Julian stopped before one in particular, its surface streaked with silver and ash. "It's about things people don't say," he murmured. "What we hide to survive." Ethan's voice was quiet. "Does it ever work? Hiding?" Julian looked at him. "Only until someone looks closely." Ethan turned away from his gaze, staring at the texture of the paint. He could feel his chest tighten. That sentence had struck too close. The truth was that hiding had become a habit, one he'd perfected beside Michael, where everything personal had turned practical. Michael wasn't cruel, just distant. And Ethan had grown tired of trying to be heard by someone who refused to listen. Julian's voice cut through his thoughts. "You seem tired of pretending." Ethan laughed softly, without humor. "I don't even know who I'm pretending for anymore." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was charged. Julian stepped closer, slow enough for Ethan to move if he wanted. He didn't. The sound of rain filled the distance between them until Julian's voice dropped, almost a whisper. "You said you couldn't take it anymore." Ethan met his eyes. I did. And yet you came. I told myself it was just for the art. Julian's smile was sad. You knew it wasn't. Ethan should have stepped back, should have said something to end the moment before it became irreversible. But when Julian brushed a strand of wet hair from his forehead, Ethan felt the tremor of something he'd buried too long. His heart beat against his ribs like it wanted to be heard. He whispered, "Julian, I can't." Julian's response was a breath against his skin. "Then don't say anything." It wasn't the kind of passion born from recklessness. It was quiet, searching, the collision of two people who had been lonely for too long. The rain outside grew louder, as if it were trying to drown out what they were doing. And when it was over, the silence returned, soft, fragile, real. Ethan sat at the edge of the couch, still catching his breath. The faint smell of paint and rain lingered in the air. Julian stood nearby, looking out the window, saying nothing. Ethan felt the weight of what had just happened settle in his chest. Guilt, fear, relief, they all mixed until he couldn't tell them apart. "I warned you," he said quietly. "I said I couldn't take it." Julian turned, his eyes calm. "You didn't take anything. You just stopped giving everything away." Ethan wanted to argue, to call it what it was, but he didn't. Words felt too small for the ache in his chest. He dressed in silence, every movement careful, as though making noise might break the fragile air around them. Before leaving, Julian touched his hand, a fleeting gesture, and said, "Don't hate yourself for wanting to feel alive." Outside, the rain had eased to a drizzle. The walk home felt endless. Ethan's reflection in each window he passed looked like a stranger's, someone braver, and yet far more lost. When he entered the apartment, Michael was asleep on the couch again, the television humming faintly. The soft blue light fell across his face, making him look peaceful, almost innocent. Ethan stood there for a moment, trying to remember the last time he'd touched him, really touched him, without distance between them. He couldn't. That he moved quietly to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. His hands were trembling. The guilt came in slow waves, crashing and retreating before he could breathe. He wanted to cry, but nothing came. He lay down, staring at the ceiling, the rain whispering against the windows. Somewhere in the next room, Michael stirred but didn't wake. Morning came gray and cold. Michael left early, leaving behind the usual note on the counter, "Meeting till late. Don't wait up." Ethan stared at it, then folded it neatly and placed it in the trash. His phone vibrated once, a message from Julian. "You left your scarf. Want me to drop it off?" Ethan typed back, "No, it's fine. Keep it." Then deleted the message before sending it. He couldn't trust himself anymore. The following week unfolded like a slow punishment. He tried to act normal, but the world felt tilted. Every sound seemed sharper, every silence heavier. At work, he caught himself smiling for no reason, then panicking that someone might notice. When Michael spoke to him, small things, routine things, Ethan's responses came delayed, as if his thoughts were always somewhere else. Julian didn't push. There were no more texts, no calls. But one evening, as Ethan walked home, he saw him across the street, hands in pockets, waiting at a light. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and that was enough. The ache returned, fierce and familiar. Later that night, Ethan stood on the balcony, watching lightning flicker behind the clouds. He told himself it was over, that it had been a mistake, that he would forget. But memory has its own rhythm. He remembered Julian's words, his touch, the way he'd listened without judgment. He remembered how it felt to be seen. Michael came out of the bedroom then, rubbing his eyes. "You're still up?" Ethan nodded. "Just couldn't sleep." Michael leaned against the doorway. "You've been quiet lately. Is everything okay?" For a heartbeat, Ethan thought this might be the moment, the one where he finally told the truth, where everything could still be mended. But when he looked into Michael's tired face, he saw only confusion, not understanding. He forced a small smile. "Yeah. Just work." Michael nodded and went back inside. The door clicked softly shut. Ethan exhaled and pressed his palms against the railing. His breath fogged in the cold air. He whispered into the dark, "I can't take it anymore." The next day, as he left for work, his phone buzzed again. A new message appeared on the screen. "Julian, I'm sorry if I crossed a line. But I can't pretend that night didn't mean something." Ethan stared at it for a long time before sliding the phone back into his pocket. That evening, he didn't go straight home. He walked the long way through the rain, the city lights glimmering on wet asphalt. Somewhere deep inside, he already knew he was walking toward another mistake, and when he finally reached the corner near the gallery, Julian was standing there, waiting, no words, no explanations. Just a quiet understanding that neither of them could undo what had begun. Ethan stopped, caught between fear and desire, conscience and longing, and though the night was cold, he didn't turn away. The morning light came in quietly, pale and uncertain, like it wasn't sure it belonged there. Noah sat at the kitchen table again, the same place where everything had begun to unravel a few hours earlier. The smell of rain lingered through the open window, mixed with the faint scent of coffee gone cold. He hadn't slept, the night had moved slowly, every second dragging him deeper into his own thoughts. From down the hall came the soft creak of a door. Aidan's footsteps followed, measured, slower than last night, but steady. Noah didn't look up when he entered. He just stared at the condensation on his coffee cup, tracing a line through it with his thumb. Aidan cleared his throat. "You're still awake." "Didn't feel like sleeping," Noah said, his voice flat. Aidan stood by the doorway for a long moment before moving to the counter. He poured himself a glass of water, drank half, then leaned against the sink. "You always were the responsible one. I should have known you'd stay up and think it to death." Noah finally looked at him. Aidan looked worn, eyes dim, hair still damp from a quick shower. He wore the same clothes, though less disheveled now. The exhaustion in his face made him look older somehow. "I wasn't thinking," Noah said quietly. "I was trying not to." Aidan nodded slowly. "That doesn't work. I tried that for years." Silence fell again. Outside, a bird called once, brief and distant, before the quiet returned. "I don't know what you want me to say," Noah said. "What happened last night wasn't supposed to," Aidan finished. "Yeah, I know." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "You don't have to explain. I was drunk. You were, being you. Trying to help." "That's not what it was." Aidan's eyes flicked up. "Then what was it?" Noah hesitated, words forming and falling apart in his throat. "It was real," he said finally. "And that's what scares me." For a second, neither moved. Aidan's expression softened, but there was something guarded behind it, as if he were bracing for rejection. That he set the glass down and crossed his arms. "So what now? You pretend it didn't happen? Go back to your quiet life with Clara?" The mention of her name stung. Noah didn't respond. Aidan continued, voice tight. "You know, I used to think leaving this place would make me forget everything. The noise, the fights, the way everyone kept pretending to be fine. But I couldn't forget you. Not for a day." Noah's heart thudded painfully in his chest. "Aidan, no," Aidan said, cutting him off. "You don't get to say my name like that, not after last night." Noah stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I didn't mean for this to happen. You think I wanted to hurt you? Or Clara? Or anyone?" Aidan's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you wanted. Maybe you just didn't want to be lonely for once." The words landed hard, sharper than intended. Noah's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, the weight of everything they'd done, everything they couldn't undo, settled between them like fog. Aidan sighed and looked away. "Forget it," he murmured. "I didn't come back here to start another fight." "Then why did you come back?" Noah asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. Aidan didn't answer right away. He stared at the window, watching the last drops of rain slide down the glass. "Because I didn't know where else to go," he said finally. "And because I thought maybe you'd still care." Noah closed his eyes briefly. I do care. That's the problem. Aiden's voice softened. Then don't say it like it's something to be ashamed of. Noah wanted to believe that, but the guilt had already taken root. Every thought of Clara twisted deeper into him, her messages from last night still unread, her trust still intact. He couldn't stand the thought of how easily he had fractured it. He turned away, gripping the edge of the table. You should leave, Aiden. Aiden blinked, the word striking harder than he expected. Leave? Before Mom and Dad get back. Before this becomes something we can't even look at each other over. Aiden's expression shifted, anger flickering beneath his calm. It already is. Noah met his gaze. Please. For a long moment, Aiden just stood there, breathing shallowly. Then he nodded once. Fine. He walked down the hall without another word. The sound of a zipper, the dull thud of a bag against the floor. Noah stayed where he was, every instinct telling him to go after him, to fix it, to say something, anything, but he couldn't. His throat felt tight, his body heavy. When Aiden reappeared, he was holding his jacket, eyes unreadable. You'll make it easier this way, he said quietly. That's what you're good at, making things easier for everyone else. Noah opened his mouth to reply, but nothing came out. Aiden turned toward the door, hand on the handle. Then he paused, glancing back. You know, I meant what I said last night, he murmured. You were the only one who ever saw me. Even if you pretend not to. And then he was gone. The door clicked shut, soft but final. The silence that followed was suffocating. Noah stood still, listening to the absence of sound, to the echo of Aiden's words replaying in his head. He wanted to chase after him, to undo everything, but the weight of his own choices held him still. He walked to the doorway and looked outside. The driveway was empty again, wet and glistening under a weak sun. A single puddle reflected the gray sky, unsteady, distorted, but honest. Noah sat back down at the table, the coffee now stone cold. He unlocked his phone, staring at Clara's unread messages. Are you okay? I had a weird feeling last night. He typed a reply, deleted it, then set the phone face down. There was no way to explain what couldn't be spoken aloud. The clock ticked softly, the same rhythm as last night, but it sounded different now, like it was marking something that had ended. Noah leaned back, closing his eyes. The memory of Aiden's voice, the warmth of his touch, and the weight of guilt wove together until he couldn't tell one from the other. Outside, the clouds began to clear. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, pale and hesitant, touching the table where two untouched mugs still sat side by side. He looked at them for a long time, then whispered to the empty room, some things you can't fix by forgetting. The light brightened slowly, the house silent except for the fading echo of his words. And somewhere far away, maybe on a road still slick with rain, Aiden was driving toward another kind of quiet neither of them knew how to live with. Noah sat perfectly still, the morning stretching endlessly ahead, and for the first time, he understood that love and regret could live in the same breath, and neither ever truly leaves.